Host of a CNN panel, Abby Phillips, recently had on a MAGA supporter, MAGA cultist, a member of the Federalists, Brianna Lehman, not really sure how to pronounce her name. And she went on this debate panel and discussed Trump's attempts to nationalize voting in America. Now, of course, nationalizing voting and nationalizing voting machines would be something that would be unconstitutional. The Constitution is actually quite clear that voting, elections, etc., that those processes belong to the state. And if you were actually concerned about something like fraud, nationalizing and federalizing something like elections wouldn't actually make sense, because all elections being consolidated into one state or one sort of material entity makes it a lot easier for there to be hacking, fraud, rigging, etc., if that was a legitimate concern. But I want to show you this clip. I want to go through how ridiculous it is, the fact that this woman, Brianna Lyman, we'll call her, makes a case for there being substantive fraud in American elections. And notice how that's just totally undermined by the very evidence that she brings.
Tonight, as Donald Trump seeks to federalize elections, his former White House chief strategist says he should take it a step further.
You're damn right. We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. We're not going to sit here and allow you to steal the country again. And you can whine and cry and throw your toys out of the pram all you want, but we will never again allow an election to be stolen.
I'm old enough to remember when many Democrats were warning of this exact thing, Brianna. Now you have, Steve Bannon saying it. You have Trump saying he wants to federalize elections. He wants federal agents to count votes. What are we to make of all of this?
Well, I think given that under Joe Biden we had millions of illegal aliens come in, it's definitely fair to be worried that there could be non-citizens voting. We know that non-citizen voting does happen, even if it is rare, according to some on the left.
How frequent is it?
Well, if you want a list of it, I actually have some for you. Hold on one second.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, like actual numbers.
Yeah,
You get to page 6 or 7
For
to find
people,
them.
I know.
I actually wanted to have a lot of quotes for you guys. All right, here we go. So a Georgia audit found 20 non-citizens registered to vote. 9 of them ended up voting in a previous election.
20?
Yeah, let me finish. In Michigan.
After how many years?
It's funny when you guys mock small amounts, but let's remember that Marionette Miller Meeks won her 2020 election by 6 votes. Okay. Imagine if there were 6 fraudulent votes.
Were they 6 undocumented immigrants?
No,
they weren't.
My point is that some elections are decided quite literally on the margins,
Sure.
and every vote counts.
But not a single presidential election has been decided by a margin of
Can I finish my
non-citizen
point?
voters.
Can I finish my point? That doesn't, just because it doesn't impact a presidential election, does not mean that it is not worthy of attention.
What is the percentage of fraudulent non-citizen voting in America?
I don't have the percentage, but I have more examples if you guys wouldn't cut me off. Let me just finish. Exactly.
I don't know.
Hold on a second. 41 non-citizens cast a ballot in North Carolina in 2016.
Okay,
1,500 foreigers registered to vote in California by the state DMV. They were not citizens in 2018.
Oh, did they? Were they caught?
Did they vote?
Actually,
Did they vote?
it doesn't
They're
matter
just
if
registered to vote. That doesn't mean they
vote as a
vote.
non-citizen is legal.
So-
According
I know,
to
but
18
they
U.S.
didn't
Code,
vote.
Section 1015, subsection F says that anyone
Look,
who knowingly makes a false statement when registering to vote
But here's the
can
thing.
get jail time.
Here's the thing. I wanted you to go through it because I think it illustrates in and of itself how actually incredibly rare this is. And even when, the Heritage Foundation went looking for non-citizens voting, over the course of, 10 plus years, they found 77 cases. Actually, more than 10 years, about 24 years, they found 77 instances of non-voters voting, and they went looking, okay? So, listen.
So just a pause to read here. It says, a bipartisan policy center analysis of the Heritage Foundation. For those of you who don't know, the Heritage Foundation is a popular right-wing think tank. So when a right-wing think tank investigated voter fraud throughout American elections in American history, they found 77 instances of fraudulent voting by non-citizens voting between 1999 and 2023. 77 cases of that happening over the course of a 24-year time span, right? Now, if you were fed right-wing propaganda, and if you exist only in these right-wing media ecosystems, you would believe the number is in the tens of, if not the hundreds of thousands, if not the millions, right? It is now mainstream opinion on conservative right-wing rhetorical strategies to signal that the reason why Democrats want immigration, the reason why they want undocumented immigrants, is so that they can win elections. It fails on its face because non-citizens can't vote. They aren't voting. 77 instances in the span of 1999 and 2023. That is not enough to sway a single election, number one. But number two, you actually still also have to demonstrate that these undocumented immigrants are coming in for droves specifically for Democrats, right? It's sort of a racist assumption to believe that just because they're Hispanic, and generally Hispanics, sure, have been, depending on which Hispanic group, but sure, Mexican Hispanics are broadly oftentimes more Democratic than Republican. In this last election in 2024, Latino men voted more in favor of Trump than for Kamala Harris. So even that assumption is dubious on its face. But this is sort of the broader point, right? This woman came prepared with evidence, so to speak, right? She actually investigated ahead of time, had the time to come in with a set of her strongest possible cases and arguments to make the case that voter fraud is not only a substantive issue that would require someone like Donald Trump federalizing elections, but it's a substantive enough issue that it's specifically being done so to undermine Republican victories, and that it's specifically being done so by Democrats and by non-citizens, but not just non-citizens, undocumented non-citizens, right? There's so many layers of evidence that you actually have to prove and establish before getting to the conclusion that undocumented immigrants are coming in droves, voting for Democrats. It's all deliberate. It's all a deliberate scheme. And quickly you begin to realize what a conspiracy theory it all really is, because they're incapable of providing substantive evidence. During the 2020 election, if you were to ask the average Republican, or even Republican lawmakers who were parroting Donald Trump's narrative about the 2020 election being stolen, you would ask them, where is this evidence that this election was rigged or that it was stolen, right? Because you don't just need evidence of anomalies, which that's often the case of which they'll point to. They'll say, well, this was the biggest time that we ever had mail-in voting. Well, of course, there was a pandemic. Of course, mail-in voting was going to be the primary way in which people voted. Well, when the mail-in votes came, they all came in favor of Democrats. Well, actually, anyone who paid attention leading up to the 2020 election would have told you that that was always going to be the case, because Democratic voters more often are more willing to vote via mail-in ballots. And Republican lawmakers, as well as Donald Trump himself, was telling Republican voters and his base, do not do mail-in votes. Go in person and submit your ballot in person. So we knew that in-person votes were going to be counted first. We knew that the mail-in ballots were going to be counted next. And we knew that mail-in ballots were going to poll overwhelmingly for Democrats. And the in-person votes were going to poll overwhelmingly for Republicans. So it's very unsurprising that you had this red mirage in the wake of the 2020 election. And then, of course, out came all of the ad hoc theories about, well, what about this vague anomaly? Well, what about this weird little election thing? Even if I were to concede that, hey, there were a lot of anomalies and weird things, you are still so far removed from establishing that somehow entails evidence of rigging, B, that this rigging was across all of the swing states that Donald Trump lost, that all run their own separate elections. As a reminder, under the Constitution, elections are ran by the states, not ran by the federal government. And the federal government and some of these state governments in often cases, like for example in Georgia, where the governorship is controlled by a Republican, you would have to prove such a wide and intensive and comprehensive conspiracy theory And the evidence just does not bear that out. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Let's go ahead and play a few more moments of this clip. But I think Abby Phillips executes this perfectly in demonstrating that, hey, even when a right-wing think tank, one of the foremost institutions that conservatives ought to be using to show evidence for their claims, is saying that there were only 77 instances of non-citizens voting between 1999 and 2023, that totally destroys your entire argument.
If this were about people, non-citizens voting, maybe that's the case, then please help me explain why Trump is still obsessed with Georgia, where he was looking for 11,000 votes, where Georgia, they've got voter ID, they've got tough voting laws. Why is he saying that Georgia was a fraudulent state, that he actually won when he did not?
Yeah, that's what he believes. I mean, he.
Yeah, that's what he believes. And this is sort of the other point, and I want to close off this. This entire idea of voter IDs is also built on this premise that we have a big issue when it comes to voter fraud in the United States of America. And when Democrats push back on the policy prescription that we ought to have voter ID, it is not out of what many Republicans would often assume is just wanting to make sure that undocumented immigrants can vote in elections en masse, because that's not the case. If you're going to put a new barrier up for voting, one of our most sacred constitutional rights, you better damn have a good reason to do it, right? And I understand the desire to do so, but it is simply the case that in a lot of these instances in which Republican local legislatures have passed voter ID laws, oftentimes it's been specifically designed to target as a means of voter suppression towards people like Black Americans. In the case of North Carolina back in 2017, the state's courts found that they were targeting Black Americans with almost surgical precision. That was the language by the judge of that case. And it was because they only allowed IDs that were more commonly held by white folks within the state rather than forms of identification that were commonly held by Black folks within the state. And so voter IDs have largely more so been a tool, a deliberate tool of voter suppression, and oftentimes a racist tool of voter suppression, rather than a genuine endeavor to solve a false issue, which is voter fraud, right? If you want to put up a barrier between people and an additional barrier between people and voting, because you obviously need to be an American citizen to register to vote, but it's a matter of actually going out, getting to the poll, and then voting. You better have a good reason to. And I think when you think about the issue, even just in a more simplistic way or a more simplistic context, do we really think that undocumented immigrants are in large part extraordinarily tapped in and concerned with American politics? Like, the average American citizen doesn't know who their congressional representative is. The average American citizen is incredibly uneducated and not informed in regards to American politics. The average American citizen, many of which don't even vote in American elections. What makes us think that there's this huge portion of either non-citizen legal immigrants or undocumented immigrants that are extremely motivated to vote in American politics? Like, we already have an issue with people believing that their vote doesn't count, right? We have a huge issue when it comes to voter efficacy in this country. It's just silly on its face to have this idea that undocumented immigrants are deliberately voting for Democrats in droves, and that voter fraud in this country is some massive issue.